News of the Times. The case of the Ipswich murder. Welcome to News of the Times. In today's episode, it is 1920 in Ipswich. The body of 30-some, Mrs. Howard, mother of a 4-year-old child and working housekeeper, is found brutally murdered and discarded under a fence on a railway near Ipswich. It is indeed a most callous and cruel death, as her head has been beaten repeatedly by a blunt instrument. As police investigate Mrs. Howard's previous employment as a conductress on the Ipswich tramways before she moved on to her new employment as a housekeeper seems to take importance. Mrs. Howard was pregnant. We take a look at this tragic tale that echoes the position of many a pregnant woman and her ex in Georgian, Victorian and Edwardian times. And in our end of episodes further particular segment, we have the astonishing tale of a frail woman abandoned on a vessel during a storm in the North Sea, as all crew members are either swept away from the roaring storm or overboard in an attempt to save those lost. Her miraculous journey and survival was quite the news story in 1886 when the event took place. If this all sounds like your kind of interests, can we ask that you smash the small like button below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. YouTube really likes subscriptions and likes as a barometer of whether our channel should be shared with other viewers. Many thanks for your kind support. Now, on with the show. Background. It all starts with a small article in the papers of a woman's body terribly beaten about the head and hidden by some fencing near the Ipswich line. From the Daily Herald, the 9th of February 1920. More crime mysteries. Woman's dead body found on the railway. A man detained. A shocking discovery was made by a foreman plate layer of the Great Eastern Railway near Ipswich early on Saturday morning. Near a fence, he found the body of a woman covered with frost and with several serious wounds on the head. The local police are of the opinion that the woman was murdered. They have detained a man on suspicion. The woman was identified as a Mrs. Howard, aged 27, who had acted as a housekeeper to a man who late Friday night reported her as missing. She had eventually come by her death the previous evening, but there were no signs of a struggle. Sarah Jane Howard, described as a single woman, although she referred to herself as Mrs. Howard, leaves behind a small 4-year-old boy. Her employer, Mr. Kettle, has reported her missing to the police. Sarah Jane has been informed that she was to be let go from her employment due to her pregnancy. This, in turn, would most certainly have caused some panic as a single pregnant mother. One can only imagine that she would most naturally approach the father of her unborn child for help. During this time, if the father refused to help, Sarah Jane could go to the parish, which would make the father pay in a public way. From the Daily Herald, the 10th of February 1920. Ipswich murder, inquest revelations. On charge of wilful murder, Frederick William Story, motorman, was brought in custody at Ipswich Police Court yesterday. Detective Inspector Wood said that on Saturday, the body of Sarah Jane Howard, a single woman, was found near the main London railway line. The police surgeon stated that foul play had taken place. Inquiries were made and Story was arrested at about 12 o'clock. At his house were found certain articles of clothing which were blood-stained. Story was remanded for a week. At the inquest later in the day, medical evidence showed that there were 8 wounds in the head. William John Kettle of Camden Road stated that he engaged Miss Howard as his housekeeper last August. She described herself as Mrs. Howard and brought her little boy aged 4 years, and she discharged her duties satisfactorily. He noticed her condition in January, and she mentioned the name of a man, saying that she was expecting the child in March. He told her she must find another home, and she left the house on Friday, saying she was going to arrange for lodgings. The inquest was adjourned until Friday. The suspected father of Sarah Jane's child is traced quickly. Frederick Story, a tramcar driver on the Ipswich line and former work colleague of Sarah Jane, is quickly traced as the man that Sarah Jane had named as the father of her child prior to her death. As police investigate, the bloody clothing found on Story's premises paints a dark picture. From the Dis Express, the 20th of February 1920, the Ipswich murder. The resumed inquiry by the borough coroner in the circumstances attending the death of Sarah Jane Howard took place on Friday. When the court was opened, the public gallery was quickly filled with those who had come expecting to see William Frederick Story, the motorman who is under remand on a charge of murder, but they were disappointed. Story neither being present nor represented at the inquest. It will be remembered that early on the previous Saturday morning, the deceased, who was at one time a conductress on the Ipswich trams and later housekeeper to a gentleman in the town, was found dead in a field close to the main line at Ipswich with terrible injuries to her head. The testimony of Sarah Jane's brother. The first witness called on Friday was James Seymour, farmer of Wychford on the Isle of Ely, who stated that the deceased Sarah Jane Howard was his half-sister and was 32 years of age. She was a single woman and was formerly a school teacher at Wychford. She left about 7 years ago. Witness knew that about that time his sister had a child and she left the neighbourhood a month or so after it was born. Witness had not seen her since. To witness's knowledge, she had not more than one child, which was 7 years of age. Testimony of her employer. Mr. William John Kittle, the deceased's employer, stated that on Saturday morning he came down to the Cornhill at about 10 a.m. as his housekeeper had not returned home the previous night. He came to try and find a Mr. Story, the same man who had been charged by the police. He did not know the man and asked the tramway inspector if there was such a man on the trams. He was informed by the witness that Story was then coming up the hill or would arrive at the Cornhill at about 10:30 a.m. When the tram came up, he asked the inspector to point Story out to him, and he did so. Witness jumped the footboard and said, "Are you Mr. Story?" He said, "Yes." And the witness said, "I think you know Mrs. Howard." He replied, "Yes, I know a Miss Howard." Witness said, "When did you see her last?" He answered, I don't know. I think it was Sunday night on the Derby Road." Witness then said, "Have you not seen her since?" And he replied, "No, I only know her just to speak to." Witness said, "I think you know a good deal about her." And he answered, "I think you've made a mistake, old man. I know nothing about her." That was all the conversation. In answer to the foreman, the witness said the deceased Sarah Jane Howard had spoken to him of Story for a fortnight or 3 weeks prior. In reply to other questions, witness said the boy had been living with him all the while. He was 3.5 when he came, and he had a birthday at the end of November. He would be 4 now. Mr. Kittle, in answer to further questions, said the deceased's regular night out was Friday. Witness had never seen a man meet her. Medical testimony. Dr. Hoyland said he made a post-mortem examination in conjunction with Dr. Green on Monday. The body was well nourished, and in addition to the injuries witness describes on the previous occasion, he found 2 wounds just above and behind the left ear. No ribs were broken. Witness stated that after examining the skull, he found 9 contused wounds on the scalp. There was 1 large fracture in addition to those he had already described, extending from the top of the vertex, travelling across to the right down behind the right eye, and 6 inches in length. There was also a fracture just behind the top of that fracture, 1 inch in diameter. Witness found the brain clotted with blood over the vertex and the side of the brain, and lacerations of the brain in 2 places on the left side. The organs of the body were all more or less normal. The cause of death was a fracture of the skull. The fracture, 6 inches long, was caused by a blow from a blunt instrument. On the 7th of this month, witness accompanied Inspector Wood and Police Sergeant Hudson to Gower Street and was there shown a mackintosh, a pair of brown boots and a shirt front, a piece of newspaper and a hammer. He examined them and found that each article bore blood stains. They were recent stains. In his opinion, it was human blood. The hammer he saw would have been likely to cause the wounds. The 9 wounds on the scalp were all through the scalp. A considerable amount of violence would have been needed to cause the injuries. The worst of the wounds would cause death, although probably more than one of the wounds would have caused death. Not the wound itself, but the injuries caused by the wounds. With evidence from Dr. Spilsbury regarding the bloodstains and the discovery of the expected murder weapon on Story's premises, the guilty verdict by the inquest jury is a foregone conclusion. From the Daily Mirror, the 28th of February, 1920. Tram girl's death. Coroner's willful murder verdict against Ipswich car driver. A verdict of willful murder against Frederick William Story, a tram driver, was returned at the resumed inquest at Ipswich yesterday concerning the death of Sarah Jane Howard, housekeeper and formerly a tram conductress. Howard's body was found close to the railway on February the 6th with her head badly battered. Dr. Spilsbury stated that the bloodstains on the articles shown to him by the police were of mammalian blood. Evidence was given as to Howard and Story being friendly and both being in the district of the murder at about 8 p.m. on February the 5th. A hammer found at Story's house, on which were bloodstains, was identified by his son as being kept on the allotment close to the scene of the murder. With the inquest finding William's Story guilty of the willful murder of Sarah Jane Howard, the case will go to trial. Story continues to maintain his innocence despite the bloody clothing and suspected weapon found at his residence. From the Cambridge Daily News, the 18th of March, 1920. The Ipswich murder. Story committed for trial. I am innocent. Frederick William Story, a motorman employed by the Ipswich Corporation Tramway Department and living at 42 Gower Street, was charged on Wednesday at Ipswich Police Court with the willful murder of Sarah Jane Howard on February the 6th and committed for trial at the Assizes. Dr. Spilsbury, the Home Office expert, gave evidence as to finding human blood stains on newspapers and stains on a hammer found at the prisoner's house by the police. Other evidence was heard. When charged in court, the prisoner said, "I'm not guilty, sir, and I'm innocent of the crime. The statement I made to Inspector Wood of my whereabouts on the Friday night is quite true. The blood on my back I cannot account for unless it came from my face when I was shaving. I nose-bled on the Monday night previous. I have seen the deceased with a man." Story's defence, such as it was to claim that he believed that Sarah Jane had had boyfriends. As for the blood found on his clothing and boots, he claimed this to be from a nosebleed or from shaving. Story's wife of 20 years testifies on his behalf, claiming Story to be a most faithful husband and providing her husband with an alibi on the night of the murder. It doesn't work. Story is found guilty. The compelling evidence of Sarah Jane having named Story as the father of her unborn child, the copious amounts of blood found on his clothing, and his insistence in distancing himself from knowing Sarah Jane despite her being a former work colleague. And it all helped condemn Story in the eyes of the jury. From the Framlingham Weekly News, the 5th of June 1920, the Ipswich murder. Story sentenced to death. Frederick William Story, aged 42, an Ipswich tramway man, was sentenced to death at Suffolk Assizes on Saturday for the murder of Sarah Jane Howard, formerly a conductress on the tram which Story drove at Ipswich last February. Story, at the end of a searching cross-examination, was asked by his counsel whether he committed the murder. He replied, "I did not." Mrs. Story, the prisoner's wife, testified that during 20 years of married life, the prisoner had been true and a faithful husband, and she had never suspected him. The prisoner did all he could to help her daughter in the housework during her illness. She noticed that the prisoner cut his face when shaving. He was also very subject to nose bleeding, especially during their early married life, and latterly, the prisoner slept with her on the night of the murder. He slept quite soundly, and she noticed nothing different in his manner or appearance. He offered to rub her leg. Mr. Justice Darling, after the prisoner had been found guilty, assumed the black cap and, in addressing the prisoner, said, "Frederick William Story, the jury have paid great attention to this case and have found you guilty of the murder of that woman. In my judgment, that verdict is thoroughly justified on the evidence. It was most painful to everyone engaged in that case to find a man of his character in the past standing in that position in which he now stood. It was due entirely for his giving way to his passion, deceiving his wife, doing this injustice to his family, and ultimately, in order to extricate himself from this trouble, that he had decided to take the life of that miserable woman. He had only one duty to perform. His lordship then passed sentence of death in the usual form, and the prisoner was taken from hence to prison, hence to a lawful place of execution, and hanged by the neck till his body be dead, and that his body be buried within the precincts of the prison in which he should be last confined. And may the Lord have mercy on your soul." The prisoner who had stood the ordeal without flinching, then turned round and walked quietly down the dock steps to the Stells, accompanied by warders. Appeals for clemency are made on his behalf, given his previous respectable reputation, but all appeals are rejected. Story will hang. From the Cambridge Daily News, the 17th of June, 1920, the Ipswich murder. Story pays the extreme penalty. The final act of the Ipswich murder drama was enacted on Wednesday morning when Frederick William Story, the ex-motorman who was found guilty at the Suffolk Assizes at Bury St Edmunds on the 30th of May of the murder of Sarah Jane Howard, on an ex-conductress on the Ipswich Corporation tramways on the Maidenhall allotments on February last, paid the extreme penalty of the law. Story had borne up well during the time which elapsed between his sentence at Bury and the time of his execution, and when the fatal hour arrived, he walked unaided to the scaffold, and within seconds of his leaving his cell, all was over. He persisted in his innocence right up to the end, and gave Ellis, the executioner, and his assistants no trouble whatever. Further particulars. We don't normally do boat-related stories, but this one is rather extraordinary. A 59-year-old woman, Betty Mowat, finds herself abandoned on a vessel on a boat trip from Shetland to Lerwick in 1886. With the captain overboard from bad weather and the crew attempting to save the captain unable to get back to the boat, Betty finds herself alone. An extraordinary tale that we wanted to share. From the Fife News, the 27th of February, 1886, the story of the Columbine castaway, the arrival of Betty Mowat in this country. Betty Mowat, as she is familiarly called, arrived in Scotland on Tuesday and made a short stay at Dunbar, whence she travelled by train from Hull. She sailed to the latter port in the steamer Domino from Stavanger in Norway. Interviewed by a representative of the press at Dunbar, it was found that although naturally intelligent, she was not able or did not feel inclined to say much of her perilous adventures over the last 3 weeks. Although still feeble and at times showing much exhaustion, she seemed in a fair way of recovering her strength. Her utmost desire at present is to return to her quiet home. Having been little used to intercourse with the world, the attention which her untoward adventure has drawn to her is not particularly to her liking, and her wish is more for her accustomed seclusion. She will, in all probability, leave Leith for Lerwick in about a week. On reaching Hull, she received an offer from a theatre manager in London who proposed to give her £10 a week merely to receive visitors. No attention was paid to this. A special correspondent of the Scotsman who had accompanied Miss Mowat from Norway has contributed a long account of her experiences and sufferings, from which we take the following extract. Adrift at sea. When the accident happened by which the skipper lost his life, the rolling of the vessel was so great, and the noises of the deck and about the vessel so loud, as to lead Elizabeth Mowat to think that it had struck upon a reef of rocks. On finding that the crew had left the vessel, her impression was that they had gone back to land for help, or for a larger boat in which to return for her. It was not until after some time, and when the vessel, as she thought, had got off and was being driven seawards, that the well-known outlines of her native place were quickly being left behind. that the true nature of her terrible situation presented itself to her mind. Being under no sort of control, the helm shifted with almost every lurch of the vessel. The waves washed over the deck from one side and again from the other. Heavy showers of spray were every minute being blown down the cabin hatchway. The loosened sail was flapping with the wind and gradually being reduced to tatters. The boom was swinging to and fro, and ropes with blocks attached to them were flying dangerously about from the rigging. The poor woman could only maintain a sitting posture in the cabin by keeping a firm hold of the fittings or of a rope which was fastened to the roof, and was in danger every moment of being thrown violently to the floor. In such alarming surroundings, the idea of being alone in a little craft on a stormy night, with the darkness of night soon coming on, presented itself to her mind in all its unmitigated terror, and she for some time gave vent to uncontrollable grief in loud and bitter screams. After a while, she became calmer, being convinced, as she says, that the sound of her voice could reach no human ear. And now another thought struck her. She added, if possible, to the desperate character of her situation. In such a sea, it was surely impossible that the little boat, which she thought had gone to land for help, could live, and thus, in addition to the loss of the lives of the three men, there would be the impossibility of the people on shore ever coming aware of her fate, and consequently there would be no vessels sent in her pursuit. Such were the circumstances, and such the thoughts of this frail invalid woman of 60 years of age, as the darkness of that first terrible Saturday night gathered round the little craft, tossing helplessly about in the storm. She's on the sea for 1 week, the only food on board being half a cup of milk and 2 biscuits. Cold is always prevalent, and she manages to find some heavy coats from the sailors' quarters. Finally, 1 week later, hope arrives. When the light of Sunday morning broke, weak and exhausted as she was from starvation and exposure, and notwithstanding that the vessel was still rolling amongst the rocks, the poor woman contrived to raise herself once more to the box and looked out of the companion hatchway. Here at last was land. The vessel was still beating along stern foremost. Every rag of canvas had been blown away. Part of the rigging was hanging over the side, and the mast had shaken itself loose and was threatening every moment to go by the board. The vessel aped on, and at about 8 o'clock ran upon a shingle beach, leant over to one side and remained fast, the mast in the same minute going over in the sea with a loud crash. As the vessel leapt towards the shore, the water in the hold made its way into the cabin and soon rose to the height of above a foot. The place where the Columbine came to land after its dangerous and erratic voyage across the North Sea was the little island of Lepsos, which lies about 12 miles north of the fishing town of Aalesund on the coast of Norway. In its physical features and size, being about 4 miles long and 2 broad, and consisting mainly of one huge rock 1,600 feet high, with several places a narrow seaboard of boulders. Alike in her course across the North Sea and in the manner of her deliverance, Elizabeth Mowatt had had one of the most marvellous escapes of which it is possible to conceive. The vessel had been watched by several on the island. Upon its being beached, Betty waves her arms and screams for help, with the Norwegian locals coming to her assistance. A most astonishing and miraculous survival and delivery from the treacherous North Sea crossing. That concludes this episode of the case of the Ipswich murder. We very much hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, we would be grateful if you could like, comment and or share the video to friends, family or even the family pet. It all helps to keep us relevant in the giant ocean that is YouTube. Thank you. All support is gratefully appreciated. You have been listening to News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles.